Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. And as the political polling in the UK has been an absolute roller coaster over the past month or so, as Labour and the Conservatives have traded places for, pulling ahead of each other several times. In this video, I want to look at the potential causes for this and determine any conclusions that we can draw with such volatile swings of voting intention over the course of a few weeks. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So polls between general elections, this is the main fun we have. That's particularly if you, like me, as hopefully like many of us, the majority in fact, who are not satisfied with our government. You just have to look ahead at the next general election. You imagine, what's going to happen? Is it going to be all right then? So you look at the polling. And as many as you know, I'm going to stay from the start. So I'm a Labour supporter. I am partisan. So, of course, I'm biased. I mean, clues in the name, really. But I am going to say, I'm going to explain my conclusions with this so you can judge for yourself. But first, couple of misconceptions that people have about the current tussle between Labour and the Conservatives. Two misconceptions, really. So what I'm talking about here is over this year, the gap has closed between Labour and the Conservatives. It used to be really high. Now it's closed. Occasionally Labour sneak ahead, then they come back and ahead and back and so on. So, misconception number one. Those who are sympathetic towards Labour cannot understand how the people, the general population, can be so blind as to still support them in the numbers that they are, given that the destruction they have wrought with Brexit, but most especially, from most people's point of view, COVID. And I see these comments time and time again. Are people insane? Are they insane? Well, maybe they are, but it's a misconception to think about that. I'll come to that in a moment. The second misconception. So then you've got the people who are less sympathetic to Labour. And I don't mean those on the sides of the Conservatives. I mean those who are also opposed to the Conservatives but are not sympathetic to Labour, or at least the current Labour leadership. And they can't understand how Labour have not pulled ahead of the Conservatives on a consistent basis. And it must be because the leadership is making dreadful errors. But this is to ignore established facts in how a population responds to the face, or in the face rather, of an external threat or crisis, or even a perceived external threat. So to take a few historical cases, in the early 1980s, for example, Falklands conflict. Now, while it was going on, it created a huge surge of support for one Galtieri, populist leader of Argentina. He was facing serious opposition back home. There were protests on the streets and also it wasn't looking good for him. Invaded the Falklands, all of a sudden, surge in popularity. Because again, there was this external thing, there was a conflict going on. All went pear-shaped when the conflict was over, fell from power very quickly then, didn't he? And of course, that then projected Thatcher. So Thatcher then got the surge of popularity from that because again, this external threat. And it works, so people rally around their leader at such times. It's a bit like, I suppose, you could have an argument in your family and then someone attacks a member of your family. It's like, hang on a minute, that's my family, bro. You leave them alone. And those who pay attention to politics see this happening time and time again. Second Gulf War, for example, boosted Bush's popularity and likely contributed to him winning his second term. Trump played on a perception of external threats to American people. The reality, of course, is that most of these terrorist attacks in the United States, the vast majority, are perpetrated by white Americans. But Trump convinced the country, or at least a sizable proportion of the country, that they were under daily attack from dark-skinned foreigners and only he could save the country from them. It works so well. People know this. Populists know that it works well and they use it to their advantage. When a population feels threatened from outside, internal friction tends to melt away. And it doesn't matter whether there is a threat from the outside, they just have to perceive it. It's a natural inclination to stop fighting amongst yourselves, to protect yourselves, rally around the leader. So far from giving Labour a great opportunity, the COVID pandemic actually hampered them. There's a reason why Boris Johnson publicly said that the coronavirus pandemic was an opportunity for the Conservative Party. Labour had to be careful in how they attacked the government on the issue because coronavirus is an external threat. They didn't want to be seen as playing party politics, because people were going, hang on a minute, yeah, we understand politics is a rough game, but, you know, we're all in this together. You know, be on board, play a hand. And it's also a real threat. In this case, it's not even a perceived threat. It's genuine. So you've even got people who are not going to be fooled by a perceived threat in on this as well, and wanting the government to succeed. And although the situation we find ourselves in now, the bad situation, is entirely the fault of Boris Johnson's Conservatives, the initial crisis was no fault of theirs. And you look at how the Conservatives' popularity grew as the crisis unfolded. It wasn't on... This gap between Labour and the Conservatives wasn't at its peak after just, at round about the time of the 2019 general election. It grew during the crisis. The peak occurred when it was actually obvious the government were making a mess of things, when they were going back on their word, when they would say, oh, there's not going to be a lockdown. Oh, my God, we need a lockdown. It still went up. Their popularity went up. Now, let's take a look at some more recent events. So in the last 5 or 6 weeks, the polls have been crazy. They've been all over the place. The Conservatives in that time have taken 2 big hits in the polls and 2 big boosts. When I say big boosts, I mean several percent at once. The first big hit was in December, when France closed its borders to us after the new variant scare. This caused freight and travel chaos, and polling showed a big swing of support from the Conservatives to Labour. So the Conservatives Conservatives lost, Labour gained. Labour jumped ahead. At this time, a no-deal Brexit was also on the cards. At least as far as the general public were concerned, they didn't know that Boris Johnson was just going to fold at the last minute. Then Johnson folded at the last minute and announced his deal. So then there was a boost back to the Conservatives. Then the news that we'd exceeded 100,000 deaths more recently. Boris Johnson pretended to be sad about this, but it was a monumental failure for the government that they said they'd done well. Remember, last year, they said, you will have done well to keep the death toll below 20,000. Now, at the time, public health experts thought that it was shocking for the government to say that. Absolutely shocking to lack the ambition to keep the death toll below that. They thought 20,000 was a ridiculously high figure when we had the facilities to really get on top of this. We could have closed our borders, we could have restricted access into the country, we could have locked down, we could have implemented face masks, all the rest of it. We were using a very effective test and trace strategy at the start, and then we abandoned it all. But now here we are, from 20,000 will be a good result to 100,000. It's more than that now, it's getting on for 110,000. But that caused a big drop in the polls again. It focused people's minds on their failures. Then just a few days later, and it's the EU dropping a bollock over their crass intention to invoke Article 16 in a private spat with a pharmaceutical company. Yes, they U-turned almost immediately, but you know what? Damage done, because the Brexit media are going to be all over that, and they ran with that for days. And the Conservatives got another rebalancing in the polls, as those fickle swing voters forgot all about the Conservatives' inspired death and cheered on the EU looking like a right tit for a moment. So what are we to make of all this when trying to project towards 2024? The first is that the election will absolutely hinge on swing voters. And swing voters, as we've just seen, are fickle. Now, I'm not saying these 3 or 4% that have swung each time are all the same people, but it's very much a case you've got this block that's going, oh no, we've messed up on COVID, oh, it's causing disruption on our ports, the Conservatives are useless, we need to back Labour. Oh, he's got a deal, oh, the Conservatives are fantastic. Oh, he's killed 100,000 of us, the Conservatives are absolutely useless. Ah, the EU, they've made the EU look silly, ah, they're brilliant. It's that level of childishness. I'm sorry, that's not the whole electorate. It's not. We're not talking 20, 30% swings here, but it only needs to be a little bit. That's the difference. Remember, if you look at 2017 general election, Theresa May didn't get a majority. She lost her majority. Boris Johnson in 2019 won a stonking majority, 80-seat majority. But he only got a few 100,000 more seats than Theresa May. It's like 300,000 more seats. It's nothing. But it's because he won a lot of seats by a small margin, very small margin. And that's what it's about. So, you know, a relatively modest number of fickle swing voters who will be influenced on the day of voting by a newspaper headline, that can absolutely swing it. You know, we like to think about, you know, a swing voter as being someone who doesn't ally with a particular party. They're not partisan, and they'll decide how to use their vote on each election based on what they see as the merits. In reality, for some of them that'll be true, but for an awful lot of them, there's no thought goes into it at all. You know, a single headline can change their minds. As they walk towards the polling station, something can change their minds. And another thing that we know is that these swing voters will turn on the Conservatives when they fail, because they have done. And after all, they turned on the Tories after the EU's vaccine PR disaster this weekend when they turned back to them. Was that anti-EU fervour? No, because the Conservatives also took the hit from them when France closed its borders in December. You know, did they see that as France being awkward now that we're no longer in the EU? No, they blamed the government. You know, it was the government making an arse of things, that. They weren't blaming France. At the moment, the Conservatives are riding high on the fact that the vaccine strategy seems to be going well. But consider what that strategy is. It was to let the NHS manage it. That's why it's going well, because the government, instead of giving it to private contractors like they did test and trace and PPE procurement, where it went badly wrong, they gave it to the NHS. Oh, look, we give it to experts and it goes well. Who'd have thought it? But here's the thing. Politics will soon enter into things again. For example, they plan to ease restrictions as soon as what they call the vulnerable groups are vaccinated. This will work no better than when they tried to do that in the past. You know, they're not going to finish this pandemic on a high this year. You know, people may be thinking, oh, it's all right now, and they've given it to the NHS and the vaccinations will go out and it'll all be fine and we're getting towards the end game. We're not. We're not. They'll mess it up with politics again. In the autumn, I absolutely invite people to tell me to eat my words if I'm wrong, but I think that by the end of summer, we're going to be looking back and going, yeah, it started off well and then politics messed it up again. The government got it wrong. How did they manage to mess it up? Then there's Brexit. Brexit's a losing position. I mean, COVID, the government could make the decisions to make the correct decisions. They could listen to expert advice now. They could choose to do that. They won't, but they could do. Brexit, completely buggered now. The time to have listened to expert opinion was a few years ago, or at least a year ago. Now, no. It started off poorly, Brexit, and it's getting worse. In a few months' time, it'll be worse still. In half a year, it's really going to get bad because we're going to have to do checks ourselves. Until the government change something in their approach to Brexit, it will continue to get worse. These aren't teething problems. People have been clear about that. This is endemic. What we can say from these polls is that the government get a bounce when it looks like they're winning. It doesn't have to be a real win, sure, just a perceived win. But the opposite is true when they're losing. And they're going to lose a lot more than win over the next few years. Of course, it's not a case of Labour standing back and waiting for the Conservatives to fail, because they also need wins. You know, I think they did well last year under Starmer against an external threat. With rally round the leader mentality, they managed to walk the line between being supportive and still criticising where things weren't good enough. But they will never poll consistently ahead of the Conservatives unless they offer the people something better. Because at the moment, what they've done is to say the Conservatives are a right disaster, anyone's better than them. And some people have gone, yeah, you're right, we'll give you a chance. Sight unseen, because anything's got to be better than this. But the rest of them need to be told, well, what are you going to give us that's better then? In 2020, Labour didn't set out any intentions as such. They didn't say what you get with a Labour government. Now that has to change to make any real progress, and it needs to change quickly. Does Starmer believe that? Does he understand that? Do his strategists? Yes. And how do I know that? Because they've already started making speeches setting out those intentions. They've not gone out to the wider public yet. They've just been done in socialist Labour circles, presumably to test out the water first before they go public with it. So not widespread knowledge yet necessarily what they've been saying, but they've been made. They've been making those steps. So we know that Labour understands the need to use 2021 to offer people an alternative to get the ball rolling for 2024. They understand that there are phases to a strategy. You cannot just go from losing a general election in the worst possible way to instantly getting yourself ready to take over. You're working towards a date. And they've moved to the next phase. Now, the question is, will they apply themselves in the next phase? Because that's not certain. Just because they sort of know what they need to do. I mean, that's a bit like telling a football team, what you need to do, lads, is to put that ball through their goal. All right, it's one thing to say that, it's another thing, but at least we know they're going to try and do that. But those are my thoughts. Until Labour do promise a vision to the wider public, until they let that wider public know what they're going to get with their Labour vote, expect that seesawing of Labour and the Conservatives in the polls. Now, if this is still happening in 2022, something has gone wrong. If Labour do know what they're doing now, however, and time will tell, then we should see a different picture emerging over the next 12 months. Won't be easy. The Conservatives already own most of the media and are now putting someone in charge to punish the parts that aren't in their pockets. They're also seizing power from Parliament and the courts. And in addition, we still have this external threat, which at the moment, it looks like the government are succeeding on. Tricky times. But that's the playing field. No point whining about it. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.